From Romans 12, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. What does that mean? How does it apply to your life? If it even does, that's what we'll explore today. Welcome to our Sunday service. When you were a kid, did your mom ever ask you, or say to you pointedly, if everybody else jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? Sometimes I would say, of course not. Other times I'd say probably, just depending on what kind of mood I was in and whether I wanted to rattle mom's cage or not. But it's a great question. And one that I bet that you've been asked at some point in your life. And they're asking you, really, are you just going to follow the crowd? Do what everybody else is doing? Or are you going to do your own thing? So I'm curious about what your experience was like as a young person and then what it's like today. Maybe you were a major nonconformist. Maybe you were part of the counterculture as a young person. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you were a perfect little boy or girl and you did everything exactly the right way. And now as a grown up, you're thumbing your nose at popular culture, at convention. You are doing your own thing, cutting your own path, making your own way. What do you think? Is there a direct relation between the way you were then and the way you are now? Maybe you have been the same the entire time. Maybe you've always been interested or disinterested in what anybody else thinks of you. I don't know. I do know that popular culture certainly changes. And I know that you and I change, individuals change. Anytime a new popular culture comes up, think about just the different trends in clothing and music and art and politics and all of it. Everything that goes into culture, it's always changing. Sometimes it comes all the way back around, sometimes it doesn't. But as a new form of pop culture comes in, the counterculture also springs up in direct response to that, which makes sense. It's yin yang. It is the dichotomy of human beings. It's night and day and all of these things. It's quiet and loud. I'm a little bit country. I'm a little bit rock and roll. It's all of it. So look back at different counterculture movements in the United States. You had the Beat Generation in the 40s and 50s with Jack Kerouac, and they were rejecting materialism and exploring Eastern religion and certainly nonconformity. The hippies came around in the 60s with Woodstock and the Summer of Love. It was peace and love and harmony, and the Beatles and Hendrix, and the music was amazing. There's no doubt about that. The 1970s ushered in punk rock in the United States and the UK with the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and the Ramones rocking out. It was anti-establishment. It was rebellion against early Rage Against the Machine kind of stuff. They were big into DIY, do it yourself. Civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s with MLK, Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks obviously challenging racial segregation and demanding equal rights for everyone, particularly African Americans. The feminist movement in the 60s through the 80s and going on today, for goodness sakes, all over the world with Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, to name a few, advocating for women's rights. LGBTQ and all the other acronyms or numbers or symbols that go along with that these days, from the 60s till today, fighting for the rights and acceptance of everyone. So I appreciate that. And then the 90s ushered in the anti-globalization movement. You had big events like the Seattle WTO protests. And the whole movement was all about looking looking at the negative aspects of globalization and the exploitation of developing countries. So a lot going on, and the environmental movement also sprung up around that time, and it carries on today. And And within all these big countercultures, there are always going to be subcultures as well, and a subculture is not in direct response to popular culture. It's just these are ideas, these are things that spring up. Hip hop culture started in the 70s and it's still alive and very vibrant today. It started in the Bronx. You have goth, started in the 70s and is still going on today. Punk is still going on today. Skate culture, skateboarding culture started in the 70s and it's still obviously around today. So there's certainly a lot. Grunge started in the late 80s and went into the 90s with Nirvana and Pearl Jam. I don't know that there's a lot of grunge rather going on today, but I'm probably wrong because I'm wrong about a lot of stuff. Straight edge subculture. I just was reading this morning that there's a lot of Gen Zs that don't drink alcohol at all. And while the straight edge subculture started in the 80s, I think it's probably you're finding and seeing a lot more popularity of that today, which is happening. So, but there's emos, there's bikers, there's all kinds of different kinds of subcultures that are out there, and certainly many more that I did not name. But I wanted to circle back to when we were kids. What were you into? What kind of teenager were you? Were you a goth kid, an emo? Were you a jock? Were you a theater kid, a math geek, a slacker, a stoner? Maybe you were big into art. I don't know. What kind of kid were you? Maybe you were all of those things. Maybe you went along, go along, get along. Did you rage against the machine? Did you march to the beat of your own drum? Do you have a chip on your shoulder? Did you have a chip on your shoulder? Kind of irritated, angsty, or are you just kind of happy to be there? These are all possible. And then the question is, interesting that during your teenage years, which are so formative, even before, how much of that have you carried into your adult life? It's always interesting as, like we've been talking about, the cultures change, subcultures pop up, you move in and out of these. We are dynamic beings. We are very dynamic. We are not static. I am not static. I am dynamic. There are certainly people out there. Today's term is non-playable characters, which is a great term. And the idea there is that if you're familiar with video games, there are characters in a video game that just do one function. Maybe there's a shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper, when you go in the door, they show up and they ask you what you need, and then they go away. So you're not really interacting necessarily with that shopkeeper. It just does the same thing. You can expect or know what you can expect from them. And there's certainly a lot of people that will go through life in that very static phase, or they just toe the company line completely. They're completely emo through and through as a 12-year-old and now as a 55-year-old. I would respect that. And this isn't good or bad. I prefer dynamism to being static. I very much prefer that. I like to think that I am constantly evolving. I'm constantly moving forward. I am constantly trying to become the best possible version of me and recognizing that the things that I like are going to change and evolve as well, and all of it's great. So I prefer that. And I imagine that you prefer that too. If you're paying attention and listening to the stuff that I'm thinking about and talking about, then you're probably on board with that. So it's interesting. For me, I was 13 years old when Nirvana's Nevermind came out. I was 14 when The Chronic came out. So, from a musical standpoint, I think I was pretty fortunate to be born when I was. And like you, I was a lot of things as I am today. I've always considered myself to be a multifaceted person with varied interests, and I'm disinterested in being categorized. I was a jock. I was a theater kid. I was into student government. I was into grunge. I was all of these things. I was interested in all of them. I found all of it to be great and awesome, and it was engaging to me. And I never felt the pull to be a part of just one of the communities. Um, that's just me. So around that same time, I was introduced to Thoreau and Emerson. I think it was my seventh grade year that we read Walden and Civil Disobedience. And Emerson's ideas about self-reliance have had an absolute lasting impact on me as well as so many people. Thoreau's ideas, all of it. I mean, they're such inspirational people, but the whole idea is that you're supposed to live authentically and deliberately and be close to nature. It's moral conscious, it's integrity, and I think that understanding and appreciating that human beings are inherently good, but also trusting in yourself and your inner voice inside of you. Maybe that's the biggest thing right there. Being true to yourself, following your instincts, even though they might tell you to be going upstream or to get out of the stream altogether, to leave the game that you're playing and to go and do whatever it is that you are being called to do. So all that makes sense to me. Grabbed a hold of it. And who knows if I had been born 10 years before that, 10 years after it, I have to imagine that things be a lot different. That's a whole interesting thing too, isn't it? What do you think? How much different would your life be if you were born 10 years earlier, 10 years later? So here we are as grown-ups, which brings me to really what I wanted to talk about. This year, what does popular culture look like right now? What is popular right now? Oh my gosh, social media, so great, so popular. Influencer culture. Wow, what a time to be alive. Everybody's glued to their screens. Identity politics. It's been big for a couple years. That's great, right? Voting based on your immutable characteristics. I'm a white guy, so I'm supposed to vote for a white guy. Or I'm a woman, so I'm supposed to vote for a woman. Or I'm this, so I'm supposed to do that. Well, don't tell me what to do. Do not tell me what to do. How's that sound? You're gonna lump me into this group because of something I have no control over? That's offensive to me. It's also preposterous. So that's going on. What about this whole quiet quitting and just being so apathetic about the work that we're doing? Hmm. Checking out. Participation trophies and equity. Oh, buddy, that's not going to have negative ramifications in the future. Body positivity. I should be grateful and love my body no matter what it looks like, even if I'm morbidly obese. Well, that's good too. That's also not going to have any negative consequences long term. No way. It's all going to be just fine. Mental illness, we are, that's not a, I don't know, maybe that is a popular cultural thing. That's a whole nother conversation, I think. But certainly I think that groupthink, cancel culture, deplatforming, and globalism, I think that these are all parts of what is going on in today's world. And if I know one thing, it's that I am not interested in groupthink. I'm not interested in just because somebody tells me to do something, I'm going to do that. In fact, probably going to do the opposite. That's at least going to be my impulse. So if these are the mainstream pop culture or just mainstream culture, what's counterculture today? And I think that one of the things is being conservative is a counterculture thing. It's fascinating now that you're seeing a lot of young people who are identifying publicly as conservative. And to publicly identify as conservative these days, whew, that is not popular in the mainstream or on social media, is it? And it's So funny that you're seeing language like this person comes out as conservative. So it's been so maligned for so long, being conservative. So it's a counterculture thing. If body positivity is pop culture, well, then being physically healthy and strong is counterculture these days. Working out, being strong, being ripped, counterculture, weird. Hard work and full engagement, checking out. If apathy, if quiet quitting is culture, then counterculture is power of full engagement and working your butt off. Participation trophies and equity are pop culture, are mainstream. Well, then winning and merit are counterculture today. If identity politics and groupthink are culture, popular culture, mainstream, well, then individualism is counterculture, and independent thinking is counterculture. If globalism is popular culture, well, then bottom up, family, community, neighborhoods, that's counterculture. And all those things, for the most part, are me. So I'm punk rock, baby. I'm rock and roll. I'm all these things. That is my take on counterculture today. I think it's an interesting thing to pay attention to and to look around and say, man, I remember back when I was a kid in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. I was a goth kid. I was emo. I was punk rock. I was a theater kid. I was a jock. I was this and that. And you look around what's going on today, you just over the past however many years that you've been observing human beings and existence, it's fascinating to see things change. But like we started talking about the verse from Romans, just because society's telling you to do something, and just because all your friends are jumping off that bridge, doesn't mean it's the right thing for you to do. You listen to your heart, listen to yourself, think about what's good in the eyes of God, and do those things. Do those things. As always, do your part by doing your best.